This story is titled, "My Sister Stole My Identity to Open a Credit Card, so I Pressed Charges and Cut Her Out of My Life." Hi, my name is Amanda. I'm 29 years old, and I live in a small town in the United States. My life is pretty ordinary for the most part. I work as a graphic designer, I love cooking, and I've always been someone who values my family deeply. Or at least, I used to. This story is about betrayal, one that cut so deeply that it changed my entire perspective on family and trust. I never thought I'd be sitting here sharing this with you, but the emotional roller coaster I went through is something I'll never forget. It all started about a year ago. I was having a typical Saturday morning, sipping coffee and browsing through my emails. I remember feeling relaxed, excited even, because it was one of those rare weekends when I didn't have much to do. But then, I saw an email that made my stomach drop. The subject line read, "Congratulations on your new credit card approval." At first, I thought it was a mistake or some sort of scam. I hadn't applied for a new credit card. In fact, I was very cautious about my finances. I always kept my credit score in good shape and avoided taking on unnecessary debt. So naturally, I clicked on the email to investigate further. It was from a legitimate bank, and the details were crystal clear. The credit card had been approved under my name, my social security number, and my address. The only problem? I hadn't applied for it. I immediately called the bank's customer service line, hoping it was some kind of mix-up. But as they pulled up the application details, my heart sank further. Whoever applied for the card had used all my personal information down to my exact date of birth. The representative on the phone asked if I wanted to dispute the account, and I said yes without hesitation. But as I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random case of identity theft. Something about it felt off. That evening, I called my sister, Emily. She's 2 years younger than me, and while we'd always been close growing up, our relationship had been strained in recent years. Emily had a habit of getting herself into sticky situations, mostly financial ones. She wasn't great with money, and she often relied on my parents to bail her out. "Hey, Em," I said, trying to sound casual. "Quick question. Have you had any weird issues with your bank or credit cards lately?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. No, why?" she finally said, her voice a little too high-pitched. I hesitated. Should I confront her directly? Something in her tone made me suspicious, but I didn't want to accuse her without proof. So I decided to play it safe. "Oh, no reason. I just got this strange email about a credit card I didn't apply for. Figured I'd ask." She laughed nervously. "Weird. Maybe it's just a scam or something. You should be careful with those." I agreed and hung up, but her reaction stayed with me. Emily had always been a terrible liar, and that phone call was no exception. Over the next few days, I dug deeper. I requested a copy of the credit card application from the bank, and when it arrived, my worst fears were confirmed. The handwriting on the application form was unmistakably Emily's. She'd even listed her own phone number as the secondary contact. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. My own sister, someone I'd trusted and loved, had stolen my identity to open a credit card. I spent the rest of that night staring at the application form, trying to wrap my head around what Emily had done. It wasn't just a harmless mistake or an impulsive decision. This was intentional. She had stolen my personal information, used it to benefit herself, and lied to my face when I asked her about it. The next morning, I decided to confront her. I drove to her apartment, my hands shaking the entire way there. I kept going over what I would say in my head, trying to balance my anger with the heartbreak I felt. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see me, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "Hey, Amanda, what brings you here?" I stepped inside, clutching the envelope with the application form in my hand. "Emily, we need to talk," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. Her smile faltered, and she gestured for me to sit down. I stayed standing. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone overly casual. I pulled the application form out of the envelope and placed it on the coffee table in front of her. "Care to explain this?" Emily's face turned pale as she glanced down at the document. She didn't even try to deny it this time. Instead, she let out a heavy sigh and buried her face in her hands. "Okay, look," she said after a long pause. "I can explain." "Explain?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You stole my identity, Emily. You opened a credit card in my name without my permission. Do you have any idea how serious this is?" She looked up at me, her eyes welling with tears. "I didn't have a choice," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm in so much debt, Amanda. I didn't know what else to do." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, to comfort her like I had so many times before. But another part of me, the part that had spent the last few days unraveling this mess, was furious. "You didn't have a choice?" I snapped. "You had plenty of choices, Emily. You could have asked for help, been honest with me or Mom and Dad, but instead, you decided to drag me into your mess without even asking." "I was going to pay it off," she said quickly. "I swear, I just needed some time to get back on my feet." I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Do you even realize what you've done to my credit? To my trust in you? This isn't something you can just brush off, Emily. It's a crime." At that, she started crying in earnest, begging me not to report her. "Please, Amanda," she sobbed. "I'll fix it, I promise. Just don't go to the police. I can't handle that right now." I felt torn. On one hand, she was my sister. We'd grown up together, shared so many memories, and been there for each other through thick and thin, but on the other hand, she'd betrayed me in a way I never thought possible. "I need some time to think," I said finally, standing up. "But I want you to know how serious this is, Emily. If you don't take responsibility for what you've done, I will." I left her apartment feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and guilt. Was I being too harsh, or not harsh enough? Over the next few days, I tried to figure out what to do. I spoke with a financial advisor, who recommended that I file a formal dispute with the credit bureaus and report the identity theft to the police. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew I couldn't just let this slide. When I called Emily to tell her what I'd decided, she broke down again, begging me to reconsider. "Please, Amanda," she said through her tears. "I'll do anything. Just don't ruin my life over this." "It's not me ruining your life, Emily," I said quietly. "It's you. You made this choice, and now you have to face the consequences." The day I filed the police report was one of the hardest days of my life. I felt like I was betraying my own blood, but at the same time, I knew it had to be done. Emily had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences of those actions. When I explained everything to the officer at the station, they were surprisingly understanding. They assured me that identity theft was taken seriously, and that this wasn't just a family dispute. It was a crime. As much as I hated to admit it, they were right. A few days later, the police contacted Emily. I got a tearful phone call from her that same night. "Amanda, how could you do this to me?" she cried. "I'm your sister. You're supposed to have my back, not throw me under the bus." Her words stung, but I stood my ground. "I gave you a chance to make it right, Emily. You didn't take it. I didn't do this to you. You did it to yourself." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Emily was charged with identity theft and fraud. She tried to downplay her actions, claiming it was a mistake and that she'd always intended to pay the credit card off, but the evidence spoke for itself. I remember sitting in the courtroom, my heart pounding as the judge reviewed the case. Emily looked so small and fragile sitting at the defendant's table. Part of me wanted to run to her, to hug her, and tell her everything would be okay. But I couldn't, not after what she'd done. When the judge handed down her sentence, probation, mandatory financial counseling, and restitution, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. She wasn't going to jail, but she was being held accountable, and that was what mattered most to me. After the hearing, Emily wouldn't even look at me. As I approached her to try to talk, she brushed past me, her face red with anger. "You've ruined my life," she hissed. Those words echoed in my mind for weeks. Had I ruined her life? Or had I simply done what was necessary to protect myself? My parents were furious when they found out what had happened. They blamed me for going to the police, insisting that I should have handled it within the family. "She's your sister, Amanda," my mom said one night over the phone. "Family is supposed to forgive." "Family is also supposed to be honest," I shot back. "She stole from me, Mom. That's not something I can just forgive and forget." Our relationship became strained after that. My parents tried to mediate between Emily and me, but it only made things worse. Emily refused to take responsibility for her actions, insisting that I was the villain in the story. Eventually, I realized I couldn't keep holding on to the idea of a relationship with her. Every time I tried to reach out, I was met with hostility and blame. It was draining, emotionally and mentally. So, I made the hardest decision of all. I cut her out of my life. Cutting Emily out of my life felt like mourning someone who was still alive. I didn't just lose a sister, I lost a friend, a confidant, someone I had shared my entire childhood with. But the betrayal and manipulation had left wounds that couldn't heal with an apology, especially when she didn't seem to feel any true remorse. Life didn't return to normal overnight. For months, I dealt with the fallout of what Emily had done. Cleaning up my credit wasn't easy. I had to work with credit bureaus, provide endless documentation, and fight to have the fraudulent account removed from my record. Every time I thought I was done, another letter or phone call would remind me of the mess she'd created. But through all of this, I learned something important. I was stronger than I realized. I set boundaries I never thought I'd be able to enforce, and I took control of my life in ways I hadn't before. Meanwhile, Emily continued to spiral. I heard through mutual friends that she was still struggling with debt, that she had burned bridges with other people who had tried to help her. As much as I wanted to feel sorry for her, I couldn't let myself get pulled back into her chaos. My parents, however, weren't as resolute. They continued to pressure me to reconcile with Emily, to let bygones be bygones. "She's your sister," my mom would say, as if that excused everything she'd done. One night, during yet another tense phone call with my mom, I finally let my frustration boil over. "You keep saying she's my sister, but what does that even mean anymore?" I said, my voice shaking. "Does being family give her a free pass to hurt me, to steal from me? I'm done pretending everything's fine just because we're related." There was a long silence on the other end of the line before my mom spoke again, her tone softer this time. "I just don't want to see our family fall apart," she said. "It already has," I replied quietly. And that was the truth. Emily's actions had fractured our family in a way that couldn't simply be repaired with time or apologies. Over the next year, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into my work, reconnected with friends, and even started going to therapy to process everything that had happened. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. One day, out of the blue, I got a letter from Emily. It was short and to the point. She apologized for what she'd done, admitted that she'd been selfish and reckless, and said she was working on getting her life back on track. She didn't ask for forgiveness or try to justify her actions. She just said she was sorry. I sat with that letter for a long time, unsure of how to feel. Part of me wanted to pick up the phone and call her to tell her I appreciated her words and that maybe we could start over. But another part of me, the part that had spent countless nights crying over what she'd done, wasn't ready to let her back in. In the end, I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to forgive her, and I wasn't sure if I ever would be. But I did feel a sense of closure, knowing that she at least understood the damage she'd caused. This experience taught me that sometimes the people we love the most are capable of hurting us in ways we never imagined. And while forgiveness can be powerful, it's not something that can be forced. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, you're not alone. It's okay to set boundaries, to protect yourself, and to prioritize your own healing. And if that means walking away from someone who refuses to change, that's okay too. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had a similar experience, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going and support each other in finding the strength to move forward. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one. See you next time.